So regardless of whether you're going to draft the sestina or the combination of the sonnet and the short poem that uses sounds, kind of like Haney does in Dream, you do need to know the basics of a sonnet. And if you're writing a sonnet, as with reading a sonnet, it's worth thinking about three fundamental things of what a sonnet is and does. First of all, 14 lines containing 10 syllables each. Second, a rhyme scheme that is preset. There's more than one type of sonnet rhyme scheme, but they're all quite similar and related to each other. So I'm going to show you two examples. You'll see how similar they are pretty quickly, and you're welcome to use either of those for your own sonnet if you're writing one. And then a breakdown of ideas into parts. The thing about a 14-line sonnet, it allows for breaking down in two fundamental ways. 4 lines, 4 lines, 4 lines, and 2. So basically 4 different parts, 3 4-line stanzas and a 2-line couplet, or a sort of larger pair of pieces, an 8-line section and a 6-line section. There are variations on sonnets that are different from that, just as there are variations in the rhyme schemes. But what I'm going to show you are 2 of the most common rhyme schemes and 2 of the most common structures for how a sonnet works for you to try. So, first example. The first sonnet in the most famous series of sonnets written in the history of our language, Shakespeare's first sonnet. I've labeled the rhyme scheme, as you can see, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G, and the words that cause those letters to have those names. You'll notice that die and memory are a slant rhyme. Memori would have been an occasional usage. You'll also notice that eyes and lies are like die and memory, but the S makes the sound a bit different, which is why I'm calling that C as opposed to B. Basically, this poem is pretty straightforward. I don't expect it to seem that way language-wise for someone reading now for the first time. But you can look at it as 4 ideas, all related. First, from fairest creatures we desire increase, that thereby beauty's rose might never die, but as the riper should by time decease, his tender air might bear his memory. Basically saying, from people who are really attractive, or animals who are really attractive, frankly, we like to see offspring so that we can be reminded of beauty generation after generation after generation. Then a contrast. But thou, contracted to thine own bright eyes, feedest thy light's flame with self-substantial fuel, making a famine where abundance lies, thyself thy foe, to thy sweet self too cruel. This is saying, you, on the other hand, whoever's being talked to, you are a very beautiful person, but you're only really keeping your beauty to yourself. You're being cruel by not replicating yourself. You're not interested in producing offspring. You can kind of see where this poem is going already. The next stanza basically combines the 2 ideas. Thou that art now the world's fresh ornament and only herald to the gaudy spring, within thine own bud buryest thy content, and tender churl makest waste in niggarding. That last word sounds like a very bad pejorative term we have now. It's completely unrelated. It has to do with being cheap, keeping your money or your other valuables to yourself. It's a word that was not uncommon in Elizabethan England. And this is sort of a combination of those 2 ideas, saying, look, right now at this moment, you are at your prime. You're the world's fresh ornament in a springtime of youth. But you're keeping the best thing you have, which is the possibility to create more of yourself, to yourself, and you're making waste that way. So it's not going to be shocking how the poem ends. Pity the world, or else this glutton be to eat the world's due by the grave and thee. Pity the world, in other words, have pity on all of us, reproduce yourself. Some people read this poem as a come-on poem, saying, you need to be reproducing yourself, you need to be sleeping with someone. And I mean, that's one reading. Another is that this poem is written for a friend or a person much admired, saying to this person, listen, you're not doing what you can do. I'd like there to be more of you. It's like a tribute poem that says, you are something precious. We need more of you in the future. Frankly, it doesn't really matter which of those 2 things has more support. You could argue both of them. What matters is that the poem shows perfectly that in 14 lines, with 10 syllables each, following an exact rhyme scheme, It's possible to write sentences that make sense. Notice the colon after stanza 1, period after stanza 2, period after stanza 3, period after stanza 4, where each piece holds together, and then the whole together makes some sense. You can do the same thing in an entirely different context. This is a 20th century poem, and it's about war. It's about how we honor or don't honor those who die, and World War I to be exact. Totally different context from Shakespeare's mid to late 1500s work. This is around 1917, this next poem, about 350 years after Shakespeare's sonnets. And the rhyme scheme, you can see, is very similar, but not the same. A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D. That'll seem really familiar. It's exactly the same. Then, instead of E, F, E, F, it's E, F, F, E, followed by G, G. And instead of having it be 4, 4, 4, and 2, you can see the 4s are divided a little bit at the start. 4 and 4 in that first 8-line stanza. Then there's a 6-line stanza, which kind of divides into like a 3 and a 3, an EFF and an EGG. It's just another way of taking the same exact number of lines, 14, same exact number of syllables per line, 10, for a total of 140, very similar rhyme scheme, and a slightly different structure. This poem says, "What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers, nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shires." This is a way of saying that those who die in machine gun fights don't get big funeral services. They don't get all the standard things. No mockeries, no prayers, nor bells. Mockeries here is a much older term. It means a tribute. No voice of mourning except for the choirs of shells, in other words, of exploding bombs, and bugles calling out songs of the dead. So that whole first 8 lines makes it very clear, this sort of rhetorical question. What is there to honor the people who die in this way? There's really not much of anything. The next stanza gives the only answer there is. It repeats the question, what candles may be held to speed them all? And then the answer finally, well, not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. So the first stanza says they don't get the normal bells, they don't get the normal prayers, they don't get the normal tributes, they don't get the normal singing, they don't get the normal anything. The second stanza says they do get a kind of unfortunate, even sadder version. Instead of candles, you get to see the glimmering in eyes of other boys who are crying, their comrades. They don't get a pall, meaning a sheet or blanket put over their casket because they're dying in no man's land, but the pallor of girls' brows instead, because people back home hear that they're dead and go pale with the loss and the grief. They don't get any real flowers. The closest thing to flowers they get is the tenderness you find when people think about them. Something that's fragile can be a thought as opposed to a flower. And at the end, each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. At the end of the day, the people left back home draw the shades in mourning, and that's sort of the best they can do because their dead have not had the chance to be celebrated. Incredibly different from Shakespeare's poem. But your job, if you write a sonnet, is to take one of these 2 rhyme schemes, which are very, very similar again, and one of these stanza structures, which are mostly similar, and see what you can do to make sense in 14 lines with a set number of syllables. Again, look at how the sentences here work. There's a question mark after one line, a period after the next, and a period after the 4th. Get another period after the 8th, then a question mark, a period 2 lines later, a period 3 lines later. These are normal English language sentences. Granted, they're 100 years old, but your job is to write the one that is from the 21st century, if that's the job you accept. If you choose Sestina instead, obviously much longer, but you only have to write 1 poem as opposed to 2, I will be posting a separate video about how Sestinas work with this one.